For 7 years, he lived blinded by pain, trapped in a cold and loveless routine. Everything changes when a little girl breaks into his loneliness with a simple question. Are you alone? That phrase sparks a deep transformation, and he must decide if he has the courage to make room for love. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. The morning always arrived the same way in the Upper East Side mansion in Manhattan, 6:15 a.m. The alarm clock would go off as punctual as a metronome, and Henry Wallace would extend his right hand exactly 9 inches to find the button that silenced the device. He didn't need his sight to know where every object was. 7 years of practice had turned his routine into a minutely calculated choreography. He always got out of the king-size bed on the left side, where the Persian rug cushioned his bare feet. 12 steps to the bathroom. His left hand would slide along the wall until it found the doorframe. 6 more steps. The toothbrush was always in the same place, in the 3rd compartment of the built-in medicine cabinet. The toothpaste had a tactile mark he'd made himself with nail polish to distinguish it from the other tubes. Henry was 42, but he seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime on his stooped shoulders. Tall, elegant even in silk pajamas, his black hair was beginning to show streaks of silver at his temples. His face had sharp features, an austere beauty that prolonged grief had made even more severe. His brown eyes, though they hadn't seen anything since the accident, still held a disturbing intensity when they turned toward someone. The accident. He didn't like to think about it, but it was impossible to avoid. How could he forget the sound of twisting metal, shattering glass, Beatrice's scream before the final silence? How could he forget that he was driving when the truck swerved into his lane? How could he forget waking up in the hospital 3 days later, and besides his sight, having lost his wife and the son she was carrying 7 months along? But Henry had learned not to think. Thinking was dangerous. Feeling was unbearable. So he had created a routine so rigid it left no room for reflection. Every minute of the day had a defined purpose. Every action was executed with mathematical precision. It was his way of surviving. After his shower, always 15 minutes, he would get dressed. Impeccable Italian suits that Regina, the housekeeper who had worked in the house for 20 years, laid out for him every night. She knew exactly which tie went with which shirt, which belt with which shoes. Henry didn't have to worry about it. He just had to repeat the movements. He would come down the stairs at 7:30, always holding the mahogany banister, counting each step. There were 23 to the ground floor. The dining room was to the left, just past the foyer, a 16-seat table that never hosted guests. Henry always sat in the same chair, the one at the head of the table closest to the kitchen. Regina served breakfast at 7:45, toasted sourdough, white, cheddar, black coffee with no sugar, and freshly squeezed orange juice. Always in that order, always in the same positions on the plate. On that March morning, a Tuesday that began like all the others, Henry was chewing his toast and cheese when he heard unusual voices coming from the staff kitchen. Regina was speaking to someone in a low tone, almost a whisper. There was another voice too, younger, female. Henry frowned. He didn't like changes in his routine. He didn't like surprises. The door connecting the kitchen to the dining room opened and Regina entered, her familiar footsteps echoing on the marble. "I'm sorry to bother you, Mr. Wallace," she said, her gentle voice tinged with nervousness, "but I need to explain something. Vanessa, who does the heavy cleaning here on Tuesdays and Thursdays, has a problem today." Henry remained silent, waiting. He didn't like conversations. He preferred people to get straight to the point. "Her husband had to travel for work at the last minute," Regina continued, "and the neighbor who watches her little girl got sick. Vanessa has no one to leave the child with. I told her it wouldn't be a problem to bring her today, that the little one would stay here in the staff area, quiet without bothering anyone. Would you allow it?" Henry felt his jaw tighten. A child, in his house, breaking his routine, invading his silent space. He wanted to say no. He wanted to send the woman and her daughter away. But something in Regina's pleading voice made him hesitate. The housekeeper never asked for anything. In 7 years, she had never made a single personal request. She won't be a bother, he said finally, his voice coming out harsher than he intended. But keep her away from the dining room. I don't want any noise during my meals. Yes, Mr. Wallace, thank you so much. Vanessa will be very grateful. Regina hurried out, and Henry returned to his breakfast, trying to ignore the irritation bubbling in his chest. Children were chaotic, unpredictable, noisy, everything he had spent 7 years trying to avoid. He finished his breakfast at 8:15, as always. He went to his home office, where he would spend the next few hours listening to audiobooks and answering emails by voice command. The investment firm he had founded before the accident was now managed by competent partners, but Henry still participated in strategic decisions, still signed important contracts. Work was another way not to think, not to feel. The day passed with absolute normality until 12:30. Henry left the office and followed his usual path to the dining room. Regina would have already left his lunch in the correct position: protein to the right, vegetables to the left, brown rice at the top, black beans at the bottom. Everything always the same. Predictable. Safe. He counted his steps, turned left in the hallway, entered the dining room, and went to his chair. But when he reached out, to pull it out, his fingers found the back already pushed away from the table. Someone had moved his chair. His heart sped up. A wave of irrational panic rose in his chest. Everything had to be in its place. Everything. Then he heard it. A light sound, almost imperceptible. Breathing. There was someone sitting next to him. "Hi," said a high-pitched little voice, clear as a bell. "Are you all alone? I'll sit with you." Henry froze, completely still. He didn't know what to do, what to say, how to react. Children were not part of his equation. They were not in the carefully rehearsed script of his life. "My name is Alice," the voice continued, unconcerned. "I'm 2. How old are you?" 2 years old. The child was 2. If his son had survived, he would be 7 now. Would it have been a boy or a girl? He never wanted to know. Beatrice had wanted it to be a surprise, and now it would forever be an unrevealed surprise. "Mr. Wallace!" Regina's alarmed voice came from the kitchen doorway. "Alice, my goodness, child, what are you doing in here?" Hurried footsteps. The housekeeper must have been running. "How many times did your mother tell you to stay in the kitchen? Come on, get out of there now." "But he's all alone," Alice protested, and Henry could hear the pout in her voice. "Big table, just him. You're not supposed to be alone when you eat. Mommy always says so." "Alice, please." Another female voice, young and mortified, approached. It must be Vanessa, the mother. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Wallace. She's so fast. She slipped away when I went to get a cloth. It won't happen again, I promise." Henry should have been furious. He should have demanded. They removed the child immediately. He should have reasserted his rules, his territory, his boundaries. But something in that little girl's voice, in the absolute purity of that observation, "You're all alone," had pierced through all the defenses he had built over 7 years. He was alone, terribly, completely alone. "Let her stay." The words left his mouth before he could think better of it. Stunned silence. Regina and Vanessa must have been looking at each other, shocked. "Mr. Wallace," Regina whispered, uncertain. "Let the girl stay," he repeated, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "For today." "Are you sure, sir? She might—" "I'm sure." More silence. Then Vanessa spoke, her voice trembling with gratitude. "Thank you so much, Mr. Wallace. Alice, did you hear that? You can stay, but you have to be on your best behavior, understand? No messes." "I'll be good," Alice promised solemnly. The 2 women retreated, leaving Henry alone with this child who had invaded his space, broken his routine, and, without knowing it, cracked the first brick in the wall he had built around his own heart. Henry slowly sat down in his chair. Alice was sitting to his right in the chair where Beatrice used to sit when they were still married and had dinner together, before the pregnancy, before the accident, before the end of everything. "You can't see, can you?" Alice asked with the brutal frankness only small children possess. "No," Henry answered, his voice sounding hoarse. He wasn't used to talking. "Why?" "I had an accident." "Did it hurt?" "It did." My mommy puts a Band-Aid on when I get a boo-boo. She kisses it and makes it better. Didn't you put a Band-Aid on? For the first time in years, Henry felt something that might have been a smile trying to form at the corners of his mouth. He couldn't complete the movement, but the intention was there, fragile as a sprout in concrete. It's not the kind of hurt a Band-Aid can fix, he explained. Oh. Alice seemed to ponder this seriously. Then you need a kiss. Kisses make everything better. Henry didn't know what to say. Fortunately, Regina returned at that moment with a tray. He heard the sound of small plates being placed on the table, the smell of home-cooked food. I brought a little lunchbox for her too, Regina said quietly. Rice, beans, and a little bit of shredded chicken. I want a forky, Alice announced. Fork, sweetie, F-O-R-K. Forky. Regina chuckled softly, a sound Henry hadn't heard in a long time from the always serious and professional woman. Then she left again. Henry began to eat in silence, following his automatic routine, but beside him, Alice chattered non-stop. You know what I saw today? A kitty. It was black with a white paw. My mommy won't let me have a kitty. She says we live in a small place. Do you have a kitty? No. Why? Your house is giant. I saw. It's bigger than my house, bigger than everything. You could have 100 kitties here. I don't like animals. What do you like? The question landed like a stone in a still pond. Henry realized with a jolt that he didn't know the answer. What did he like? It had been so long since he'd allowed himself to like anything. To feel pleasure in something seemed like a betrayal of Beatrice's memory, of the pain he carried like a penance. I don't know, he admitted, and the honesty of that confession hurt more than he expected. I like to draw, Alice offered generously, and eat ice cream and watch the birdies and hug my mommy and listen to a story before bed. Do you want me to tell you a story? No. Okay. You're very quiet, aren't you? I am. I'm quiet sometimes, too. When I'm sleepy. Are you sleepy? No. Me neither. Lunch continued like this, with Alice filling the silence with her childish chatter and Henry responding in monosyllables. But something was happening, something he couldn't name. The presence of this child, her crystal-clear voice, her unfiltered questions, were piercing the cocoon of indifference he had built. It was uncomfortable. It was unsettling. It was alive. When they finished eating, Alice scrambled down from her chair with a thud that made Henry jump. I'm going to go find my mommy, she announced. Bye, quiet man, and she ran off, her little footsteps echoing down the hall. Henry was left alone in the dining room, feeling something strange in his chest. It felt like a tightness, but different from the anguish that accompanied him daily. It was something warmer, more alive. It took him a few seconds to identify what it was. Longing. Not for little Alice, whom he barely knew, but longing for what could have been, for the son he never got to hold in his arms, for the noisy meals that never happened, for the life that was brutally cut short on a rainy night 7 years ago. Henry went up to his office and tried to get back to work, but his mind was scattered. He kept hearing that little voice. Are you all alone? Yes, he was. He was alone in a way that went far beyond the absence of other people. He was alone inside himself, exiled from any true human connection. At 5:00, the time Vanessa would finish her work and take her daughter home, Henry went downstairs again. He wasn't sure why. Perhaps a silent farewell to the little intruder who had disrupted his so carefully organized day. He was in the foyer when he heard Alice say excitedly, Can I come back tomorrow? No, sweetie, Vanessa's voice answered tenderly. You only came today because it was an emergency. Tomorrow you'll stay with Mrs. Davis like always. But I want to come here. I want to have lunch with the quiet man again. Alice, we can't bother Mr. Wallace. He's a very busy person. He was all alone. Being alone is sad. Henry felt those words pierce his chest like a sharp blade. Yes, being alone was sad, but it was also safe. It was predictable. It was controllable. Goodbye, Mr. Wallace, Vanessa called out, already near the door. Thank you so much for your understanding today. It won't happen again, I promise. He gave a brief nod, speechless. The door closed. The house returned to absolute silence. But it was a different silence. Heavy, self-aware. The kind of silence you only notice after a noise stops. That night, Henry had dinner alone, as always. But for the first time in 7 years, the empty chair beside him seemed emptier than ever. For the first time, he missed a companion who wasn't the ghost of Beatrice haunting his thoughts. He went up to his room at 10, showered, put on his pajamas, and lay down in the same position as always. But sleep wouldn't come. His mind kept returning to that afternoon, to that child's voice asking why he was alone, offering to tell a story, declaring that kisses make everything better. Kisses make everything better. What beautiful, impossible innocence. Henry didn't believe in healing. He believed in survival. He believed in routines that avoided chaos. He believed in walls high enough to keep the pain out, even if it meant keeping everything else out too. But now, on that Tuesday night in March, lying in his king-size bed in a silent room in an empty mansion, Henry Wallace found himself thinking a dangerous thought, something he hadn't allowed himself to think for 7 years. What if there was another way to live? What if absolute control wasn't survival, but just a slow-motion death? What if that 2-year-old girl with her bell-like voice and unfiltered questions had seen something in him that he himself had forgotten existed? He turned over in bed, trying to push away these dangerous thoughts, but they persisted, small as seeds, planted in soil he thought was permanently barren. The following Thursday, when Vanessa returned to work, Alice would be with her. Regina had explained that the neighbor who watched the girl was still sick, and there was no other short-term option. Henry could have forbidden it. He could have said no, he could have reinforced his boundaries. But he said nothing, and deep down, somewhere very hidden inside, a tiny, frightened part of him was waiting for that Thursday, with something that, if he were honest with himself, could almost be called anticipation. Almost. The house plunged back into silence, but it was a different silence now. It was no longer peace. It was just absence. And absence, Henry was beginning to realize, was something completely different from chosen solitude. He didn't know it yet, but that Tuesday marked the beginning of a transformation he could no longer contain. Like a loose brick in a dam, Alice's presence had begun to crack the structure Henry had built, to protect himself from life. And when a dam starts to give way, no amount of control can hold it back. Life, with all its messiness and unpredictability, was about to invade that silent mansion on the Upper East Side. And Henry Wallace, the man who had spent 7 years running from any feeling, would have to decide if he still had the courage to feel again. But for now, on that March night, he just lay in the dark, listening to the silence, and wondered why a 2-year-old child had managed to do in one afternoon what no one had managed in 7 years, make him question if surviving was really the same as living. The answer would come. But not that night. That night, Henry just closed his eyes and for the first time in a long time fell asleep without having to count sheep or recite prime numbers or do any of the mental tricks he used to ward off thoughts before sleep. That night he simply slept, and he dreamed. And in the dream, there was a big table, an empty chair beside his, and a child's voice asking, "Are you all alone?" And for the first time, instead of answering yes with resignation, he found himself wishing he could answer no. He couldn't yet. But maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to be forever. Thursday arrived wrapped in a fine mist that covered New York like a silk veil. Henry woke up at his usual time, followed his usual routine, went down for his usual breakfast, but there was something different in the air, a subtle tension he couldn't name. It was as if the whole house was holding its breath, waiting. Regina served breakfast at 7:45, punctual as a Swiss watch, but Henry noticed she lingered a few seconds longer than usual before retreating to the kitchen, as if she were waiting for him to say something. He said nothing. He didn't know what to say. At 9 o'clock, he heard the back door open, Vanessa's voice greeting Regina, and then that unmistakable sound, quick, light footsteps like butterflies running down the service hallway. Henry was in his office trying to concentrate on a financial report his assistant had recorded for him, but his ears were tuned to other sounds. He heard Alice ask where the quiet man was. He heard Vanessa whisper that he was working and couldn't be disturbed. He heard the disappointment in the little girl's voice when she said, "Oh, okay." For some reason he preferred not to analyze. That disappointment bothered him. The hours passed slowly. Henry pretended to work, but his mind was elsewhere. He listened to sounds from other parts of the house. Vanessa vacuuming, Alice humming a nursery rhyme, Regina giving instructions about the cleaning. At 12:30, Henry stood up and went to the dining room. His heart was beating a little faster than normal, though he wouldn't admit it even to himself. He sat in his chair and waited. Regina brought his lunch. Henry began to eat, listening for every sound, but there were no little footsteps approaching, no bell-like voice asking if he was alone. He chewed without appetite, feeling something unpleasant settling in his chest. It was ridiculous, it was absurd, but it was undeniable he was disappointed. He was finishing his meal when he heard low voices from the kitchen. Vanessa seemed to be scolding Alice for something. The girl was protesting, her voice frustrated. Henry sat motionless, listening. "But I want to keep him company," Alice insisted. "He's working, sweetie. We can't bother him." "But he eats all alone. Nobody should eat all alone." "Alice, we've talked about this. Mr. Wallace likes to be alone." "No, he doesn't. I saw it on his face the other day. He gets sad when he's alone." Henry felt something tighten in his throat. How could a 2-year-old have so much perception? How could she see what he spent so much energy trying to hide? Before he could think better of it, before reason could stop him, Henry heard his own voice echoing through the house. "You can come, Alice, if you want to. Have lunch in here, you can come." Absolute silence. Then a little shriek of joy and running footsteps. Alice appeared in the dining room doorway like a tiny hurricane. Henry heard her climb onto the chair next to him, the same one she had occupied on Tuesday. "Hi, quiet man," she said, clearly beaming. "I came." "So I see," Henry replied, and he realized his own words carried something that could be called humor. Vanessa appeared a moment later, her voice mortified. "Mr. Wallace, I'm sorry she heard you call and ran off before I could—" "It's all right," Henry interrupted her. "Let her stay." "Are you sure? I can give her lunch in the kitchen. You don't have to—" "I'm sure. Twice is a pattern. Better just accept it." Vanessa hesitated, then let out a soft laugh, a nervous but genuine sound. "All right. Thank you so much. Alice, be good, you hear?" "I hear," Alice repeated solemnly. And just like that, without Henry fully realizing how it had happened, it became part of the routine. Every Thursday, Alice had lunch beside him. Every Tuesday, too, because Regina, seeing that her employer didn't object, suggested to Vanessa that she bring the girl whenever she came to work. It would be easier for everyone, she argued, and Vanessa, a single mom working at 3 different houses to support her daughter, gratefully accepted. The weeks went by, and something extraordinary began to happen. Henry, the man who had spent 7 years avoiding any deviation from his routine, found himself looking forward to Tuesdays and Thursdays, looking forward to that child's voice that transformed his solitary lunches into improbable conversations. Alice talked non-stop. She told him about the cartoons she watched, about playing at the park, about the neighbor who had a parrot, that cursed about the stray cat she wanted to adopt, but her mom wouldn't let her. And Henry, to his own surprise, began to respond, not just with monosyllables, but with full sentences, sometimes even stories. It was on an afternoon in April that everything truly changed. Alice, as usual, was chattering during lunch. "You know what I wish?" she said, swinging her little legs that didn't reach the floor. "I wish I had a puppy, a really little one with floppy ears. Do you have a dog?" "No," Henry answered, chewing his rice. "Why? You live in a giant house. You could have a whole bunch of dogs here." Henry was silent for a moment. Why didn't he have a dog? Why didn't he have anything but routines and silence? "I never thought about it," he admitted. "You should think about it. Dogs are nice. They keep you company when you're sad." The sincerity of that statement hit him like a punch to the gut. Henry put his fork down on the plate and turned in Alice's direction, his unseeing eyes fixed on her. "Do you think I'm sad?" he asked, his voice low. Alice was quiet for a second, which was rare for her. Then she said with the brutal honesty of small children, "I do, you don't smile much. My mummy says people who don't smile much are sad on the inside." Henry felt something break inside him, a tiny but definitive crack, like ice breaking in the spring. "What if I got a dog for you?" he heard himself say. "A little puppy with floppy ears, just like you want." Alice's shriek was so high-pitched that Henry flinched. "Really? For real? A real puppy?" "For real, but he'll stay here in this house. You can play with him whenever you come with your mom. You can name him, teach him tricks, but he lives here. That way you have a dog and I—" He hesitated. "And I have company too." "Will you take care of him when I'm not here?" Alice asked, suddenly serious. "I will, I promise." "Okay then, we'll share him, like how siblings share a toy." Siblings. The word echoed in Henry's mind. He didn't have any siblings, except for Gabriella, his older sister, whom he'd barely spoken to since the accident. She had tried to help at first, but he had pushed her away, pushed everyone away. He preferred isolation to others' pity. But now, sitting next to this little girl who had invaded his life without asking permission, Henry realized that isolation wasn't protection, it was just another way of dying. "Like siblings," he agreed, his voice strangely hoarse. Regina and Vanessa, who had heard everything from the kitchen, looked at each other in disbelief. Vanessa had tears in her eyes. In the 2 months she'd been working there, she had noticed the sadness that permeated the mansion, the loneliness that emanated from her employer, and now her daughter, her little 2-year-old Alice, was doing what no one else had managed. She was bringing life to this place. The following Saturday, Henry asked Regina to arrange for a dog, not just any dog, but a beagle puppy, with long ears and sweet eyes. The animal arrived on a Monday, and Henry instructed the housekeeper to bring Vanessa and Alice over to meet him, even though it wasn't the cleaner's workday. When Alice saw the puppy, her cry of joy echoed throughout the mansion. She squeezed him in her arms, covered him with kisses, and chattered non-stop. "He's the most beautiful puppy in the world. Look at his ears, look at his little belly." "What do you want to name him?" Henry asked, smiling. Yes, smiling. The movement of his facial muscles felt strange, having been out of use for so long, but it was also good, surprisingly good. Alice thought for a moment, very seriously. "Popcorn, because he's brown like burnt popcorn." "Popcorn is perfect," Henry agreed. Vanessa watched it all with restrained emotion. This man, so reserved and distant, was crouched on the living room floor, letting the puppy lick his hand, smiling at her daughter. It was like witnessing a miracle happening in slow motion. "Mr. Wallace," she said quietly, "I don't know how to thank you. Alice is so happy, and you didn't have to—" "I did have to," Henry interrupted, still petting Popcorn. "You don't understand, but I needed this. This house was dead. I was dead. You're bringing me back to life." Vanessa swallowed hard, not knowing what to say. She had never imagined that her employer, this man who seemed to be made of ice, could say something so profoundly vulnerable. The days passed and the mansion began to change. Popcorn brought chaos to Henry's meticulous order. The dog didn't understand routines, didn't respect schedules. He barked when he wanted attention, had accidents in inappropriate places, stole socks and shoes. It was frustrating, exasperating, and completely wonderful. Henry found himself laughing, not restrained smiles, but genuine belly laughs when Popcorn chased his own tail, or when Alice tried to teach the dog to shake, and he knocked her over with enthusiastic licks. Alice started bringing drawings to put on the mansion's refrigerator. The first was a colourful scribble she said was a family portrait. A tall man in dark glasses, a short little girl, a dog with giant ears, and a woman with long hair. "This is you," Alice explained, pointing to the tall man. "This is me, this is Popcorn, and this is my mommy." Henry ran his fingers over the paper, feeling the texture of the crayon. "A family," he said softly. "Yep. We're kinda like a family now, right?" Henry didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was too tight. Tuesdays and Thursdays became the most important days of the week. Alice and Vanessa would arrive at 9 in the morning. The girl would run to play with Popcorn while her mother worked. At 12:30, Alice would climb into the chair next to Henry, and they would have lunch together, talking about everything and nothing. Henry started telling stories from his childhood, from when he was Alice's age, and the world seemed infinitely large and full of possibilities. He talked about his first day of school, about being afraid of the dark, about the dog he had when he was 7 named Thor. Alice listened intently, asking questions, demanding details, and Henry, talking about the boy he once was, began to reconnect with a part of himself he thought was lost forever. One afternoon, while Alice was drawing on the living room floor and Popcorn slept beside her, Vanessa appeared at the door, shyly. "Mr. Wallace, can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "You lost your sight in the accident, didn't you?" "I'm sorry to pry. Regina told me a little about what happened." "I'm so sorry." Henry stiffened. No one talked about the accident. No one dared to mention Beatrice or the baby, or that night that changed everything. His first impulse was to end the conversation, to raise his defenses, to pull away, but then he felt a small hand touch his leg. Alice had approached without him noticing. "Were you sad?" she asked. Henry took a deep breath. "I was. Very sad." "Are you still sad?" "Sometimes. But sometimes you laugh. I saw you. When Popcorn peed on your shoe, you laughed out loud." It was true, he had laughed. For the first time in 7 years, he had laughed at something genuinely funny, without guilt, without feeling like he was betraying Beatrice's memory. "That's true," he admitted. "I did laugh." "So you're getting less sad," Alice declared with the simple logic of children. "That's good. Sad isn't nice." Vanessa watched the scene with shining eyes. Her daughter, without knowing it, was healing this man. And she, Vanessa, was starting to feel something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Admiration, affection, something deeper and more dangerous. Henry was 10 years older, from a completely different world. He was rich, educated, sophisticated. She was a cleaner, a single mother who had barely finished high school. It was absurd to think there could be anything between them. But the heart doesn't care about logic, and hers was starting to beat faster every time Henry smiled. The weeks turned into months. June arrived with its cold nights and misty mornings. The routine of the house had completely changed. It was no longer silent and controlled. It was full of life, of sounds, of surprises. Popcorn was growing quickly, turning into a mischievous and loving dog. Alice invented new games every day, and Henry, slowly, was loosening the restraints he had placed on his own heart. One evening, after Vanessa and Alice had left, Regina came into the office where Henry was listening to classical music. "Mr. Wallace, may I speak with you?" "Of course, Regina. I've worked in this house for 20 years. I saw you grow up, get married, suffer, and I've never meddled in your personal life, but I need to say something." Henry waited, tense. "In the last few months, I've seen you come back to life, start smiling again, having hope. And it's a beautiful thing to see, but I also need to warn you as someone who cares about you. Be careful. That little girl is getting very attached to you, and you to her. What will happen when she grows up, when she doesn't want to come here and play anymore? Have you thought about that?" Henry hadn't. He was so absorbed in the present, in the joy of each moment, that he hadn't considered the future. Children grow up, Mr. Wallace, and people like Vanessa, hard-working, struggling, might have to move, look for better opportunities. Are you ready to face another loss? The words fell like stones in a still pond. Henry felt the old panic return, that feeling of losing control, that pain was lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. "What are you suggesting?" he asked, his voice tense. "I'm not suggesting anything, just warning you. You're opening up again, and that's wonderful. But it's also dangerous. I just want you to be aware of it." Regina left, leaving Henry alone with his turbulent thoughts. She was right. Of course she was. He was getting too attached. He was letting this child, this borrowed family, get too deep into his life. What if he lost everything again? What if Vanessa decided to move away? What if Alice grew up and lost interest? What if? That night, Henry slept poorly, tormented by nightmares where he lost Alice the same way he lost Beatrice and his son. He woke up sweating, heart racing, hands shaking. For the first time in months he considered going back to his old routine, pushing them away before it was too late, protecting himself while there was still time. But the following Thursday, when Alice ran in and shouted, "Quiet man, Popcorn learned a new trick, come see," Henry realized it was already too late to protect himself. He already loved that little girl. He loved her smiles, her impossible questions, her contagious joy. He loved the way she hugged him without fear, held his hand with absolute trust, called him her friend, and, even more frightening, he was starting to feel something for Vanessa, for the gentle way she treated her daughter, for the strength she showed raising Alice alone, for the intelligence that shone in her comments, for the simple beauty of her smile. Henry was falling, not just falling in love, but allowing himself to love again. And love, he knew all too well, was the most dangerous thing in the world. Because love meant having something to lose. But watching Alice proudly show how Popcorn could sit on command, seeing Vanessa's smile as she watched her daughter, Henry made a decision. It was worth it. Even if it only lasted another day, another week, another month. Even if it ended in pain again. It was worth it. Because the last few months, full of laughter and hugs and simple moments of joy, had been more alive than the previous 7 years of controlled survival. He was ready to take the risk, ready to live, ready to perhaps be happy again. He didn't know yet that this decision would be tested very soon, that his sister Gabriella was about to enter the scene, determined to protect him from himself, that everything he was building was about to be threatened. But in that moment, watching Alice and Popcorn play, hearing Vanessa's laugh, Henry was at peace. And peace, he was discovering, was far more valuable than control. The storm was coming. But for now, there was sunshine. July brought grey, cold days to New York. The city would wake up shrouded in a dense fog that was slow to dissipate, as if the sky itself were hesitant to reveal what the day would bring. Henry didn't know it, but that July would change everything. Gabriella Wallace showed up on a Monday unannounced. Regina answered the doorbell and found herself facing her employer's older sister, elegant as always in her impeccable grey pantsuit and leather briefcase. "I'm here to visit my brother," Gabriella announced, walking in without waiting for an invitation. "Where is he?" "In his office, Ms. Wallace, but perhaps I should let him know that—" "No need to announce me. I'm his sister." Gabriella climbed the stairs with determined steps, her heels echoing on the marble. She stopped in front of the office door and knocked once before entering. "Henry." He recognized the voice immediately and felt his entire body tense. Gabriella. They had spoken maybe 3 times in the last 7 years, all by phone, all brief and superficial conversations. "Gabriella, I wasn't expecting you." "Clearly," she replied, surveying the office. "Can we talk?" "We are talking." "Henry, don't make this difficult. I came because I'm worried about you." He tilted his head, suspicious. "Worried? After 7 years?" Gabriella sighed, sitting in one of the leather armchairs. "I tried to be there for you. You pushed me away, you pushed everyone away, but now I have reason to believe you need help." "I don't need help, I'm fine." "Are you? Then why is there a small child running around this house? Why are one of your employees and her daughter practically living here?" Henry felt anger rise, hot and fast. "Who told you that?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're vulnerable, Henry. You lost Beatrice, you lost your sight, you've been isolated for years. It's natural that in this fragile state you'd cling to any show of affection. But you need to understand that you could be being manipulated." "Manipulated?" The word came out like a growl. "What are you talking about?" Gabriella opened her briefcase and took out an envelope. "I hired a private investigator. You need to see who these people are that you're letting into your life." "You did what?" Henry stood up, slamming his hands on the desk. Popcorn, who had been sleeping at his feet, woke with a start and began to bark. "I did what was necessary, and I found some concerning things. This woman, Vanessa, had her daughter very young. The father disappeared. She works multiple jobs, never has any money. Suddenly she finds a rich, lonely, vulnerable widower. It's the perfect setup for a con. Get out." Henry's voice was dangerously low. Henry, be rational. You're getting attached to this child because she represents the son you lost. And this woman, this Vanessa, is taking advantage of it. She sees an opportunity, a way to secure her and her daughter's future. I said, get out. I'm not leaving until you hear me out. I brought documents. A non-fraternization agreement preventing employees from forming inappropriate personal bonds with their employer. You need to sign this. You need to protect yourself. I'm not signing anything. Gabriella stood up, approaching him. Then I'll have to take more drastic measures. I can. File for a conservatorship. I have medical reports proving you've suffered severe trauma, that your mental health is compromised. A judge could appoint me as your legal conservator, and then I will protect you, whether you like it or not. The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Henry felt the floor shift beneath his feet. A conservatorship, losing his autonomy, his freedom of choice, being treated like an invalid, an incompetent, all over again. You wouldn't, he whispered. I would, out of love for you, because someone needs to protect you from yourself. Gabriella left the envelope on the desk. Think about it, Henry. Either you sign this document voluntarily, pushing these people away, or I start the conservatorship proceedings tomorrow. The choice is yours. She left, leaving Henry alone with his rising panic. His hands were shaking. His heart was racing. All the certainties he had built over the last few months were crumbling like sandcastles. What if Gabriella was right? What if he was being manipulated? What if his neediness, his loneliness, was clouding his judgment? What if Alice and Vanessa were just taking advantage of a vulnerable man? No, it couldn't be. Alice's smile was genuine. Vanessa's affection was real. It couldn't all be a lie. But doubt, once planted, grew like a weed, and Henry couldn't pull it out. The following Thursday, when Vanessa and Alice arrived, Henry was different, distant, tense, answering in monosyllables, avoiding conversation. Alice noticed immediately. Is the quiet man mad at us? I'm not mad. Then why aren't you talking? I'm tired. But you always talk to me. You tell stories. We play with popcorn. Not today, Alice. I have to work today. The little girl was silent for a moment, confused. Then, with that childish ability to accept what she doesn't understand, she climbed down from her chair. Okay, will you play with me later? Maybe. But Henry didn't play. He spent the day locked in his office, tormented by doubts. He heard Alice call for him a few times, heard popcorn scratching at the door. He ignored it all. Vanessa noticed the change too. At the end of the day, before leaving, she asked to speak with him. Mr. Wallace, did something happen? Did I do something wrong? No, I just need some space. Space, but I thought, I'm sorry, I don't mean to pry. It's just that for the last few months it seemed like we were getting close, She hesitated. Like a family. We are not a family, Henry said, harsher than he intended. You work here. Your daughter is allowed here as a courtesy, but there are lines that shouldn't be crossed. He could hear, with his sharpened sense of hearing, Vanessa take a step back as if she'd been slapped. I understand, she said, her voice trembling. I'm sorry if I crossed any lines. That wasn't my intention. She left quickly, took Alice by the hand and left the mansion in silence. Henry heard the door close and felt something die inside him, but it was necessary, right? He had to protect himself. He had to keep his distance before he got hurt again, before he lost again. The following days were torture. Alice and Vanessa continued to come on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but everything had changed. The girl no longer ran to play with popcorn. She no longer climbed into the chair next to Henry at lunch. She stayed quietly in the kitchen, drawing in silence, occasionally asking her mother if the quiet man was still mad at her. Vanessa worked efficiently, professionally, without making conversation beyond what was strictly necessary. She didn't smile anymore. She didn't offer coffee. She didn't tell stories about Alice. She treated Henry like what he had said she was, just an employee. Henry hated himself. He hated himself for hurting that innocent child. He hated himself for wounding Vanessa. He hated himself for going back to being the cold, distant man he had been after the accident. But he kept it up, Because Gabriella called every day demanding a decision. Sign the document or face the conservatorship. Protect yourself or lose everything. Regina tried to talk to him once. "Mr. Wallace, I don't know what's going on, but that little girl cries every night. Vanessa told me. Alice doesn't understand why you don't want to play with her anymore. She thinks she did something wrong." Henry closed his eyes, feeling a physical pain in his chest. It's better this way. Better now than later. Better for whom? For you, hiding away again? For them, suffering without understanding why? For everyone. In the long run, it's better for everyone. But it wasn't. It wasn't better for anyone. Popcorn stopped eating, spending his days, lying at the door of Henry's room, whining softly. The mansion became silent again, but it was a sick silence, heavy with unspoken sadness. One night in August, Henry woke up sweating, his heart racing. He had dreamed of Beatrice, but it wasn't Beatrice dead in the accident, it was Beatrice alive, looking at him with disappointment. "You were learning how to live again," she said in the dream. "And then you gave up. Because you were afraid. Always because of fear." He woke up with tears on his face, tears he hadn't shed since the accident, and he realized, with devastating clarity, what he was doing. He was choosing a living death. Again. He was letting fear win. Again. Alice wasn't manipulating anyone. She was just a child who saw a lonely man and wanted to keep him company. Vanessa wasn't running a con. She was just a hard-working, kind mother who was grateful that a stranger was good to her daughter. And he, Henry, was destroying it all because of the paranoia of a sister who hadn't seen him in 7 years and thought she knew what was best for him. The next morning, a Tuesday, Henry waited in the dining room. When he heard Vanessa and Alice arrive, his heart sped up. He heard the little girl ask in a small voice, "Can I go see Popcorn, Mommy?" "You can, but be quick. And don't bother Mr. Wallace." Hesitant footsteps in the hall. Alice was afraid of him now, afraid of the quiet man who had been her friend and who had suddenly rejected her without explanation. Henry couldn't bear it. He stood up, followed the sound of the footsteps to the living room. "Alice?" She stopped. He could feel the tension in the air. "Hi," she said, her voice cautious. "Can I talk to you?" Silence. Then, "Did I do something bad?" The question broke his heart in two. "No, you didn't do anything wrong. I'm the one who did something wrong." "Why were you mad?" "I wasn't mad. I was scared." Scared of what? How could he explain it to a 2-year-old? How could he translate the complexity of trauma, loss, and the fear of loving again into simple words? "I was scared of losing you, of getting too attached and then you leaving." Alice thought about this very seriously. Then she said with that strange wisdom children sometimes possess, "But everyone leaves sometime. That's how it works. We grow up, we move. But that doesn't mean the love goes away. Love stays." Henry knelt, letting himself fall to the marble floor. "How do you know that?" "My mommy tells me. She says my daddy left before I was born, but the love he felt for me stays. It's kept right here," she patted her own chest, "in my heart." Henry held out his arms, and Alice, without hesitation, ran to him. She hugged him tight, so tight, and he felt all his defenses crumble at once. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm sorry I was mean." "You're forgiven, but don't do it again, okay? It hurts." "I won't. I promise." They stayed like that, hugging for long minutes. Popcorn came running, barking with joy, jumping on both of them. And Henry, kneeling on the floor of his cold mansion, hugging a 2-year-old child and a mischievous dog, felt more at home than he had in years. But the moment was shattered by Gabriella's voice, sharp as a blade. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." Henry stood up quickly. He hadn't heard his sister come in. Regina must have let her in. "Gabriella, what are you doing here?" "I came to get your signature on the document. It's been 2 weeks. Either you sign or I start the conservatorship proceedings today." Vanessa appeared in the doorway, pale. She had heard everything. "Mr. Wallace, what's going on?" "I'll explain. Gabriella answered for him, her voice hard. My brother is emotionally vulnerable, and you two, mother and daughter, are taking advantage of that. But it's over. Either you leave this house voluntarily and never come back, or I'll make sure you can't get a job anywhere in New York. I know influential people. I can destroy your reputation with 2 phone calls. Gabriella! Henry roared, advancing on his sister. Popcorn growled, but Vanessa held up a hand, stopping him. There were tears in her eyes, but her voice was steady. You don't have to threaten us, we'll leave. No, Henry pleaded. Vanessa, please. It's better this way, Mr. Wallace. We don't want to cause any trouble. Alice, come on, sweetie. We're going. But what about Popcorn and the stories and... We're going, Alice, now. The little girl started to cry, silent tears streaming down her small face. Vanessa picked her up, even though she was getting heavy, and headed for the door. Henry wanted to run after them, to scream, to stop them, but he was paralyzed by the fear that Gabriella would follow through on her threats, paralyzed by the possibility of a conservatorship, paralyzed by 7 years of unresolved trauma. The door closed. Vanessa and Alice were gone, and Henry, for the second time in his life, let love slip through his fingers out of pure cowardice. Gabriella placed a hand on his shoulder. I did this for you. One day you'll thank me. Henry pulled away sharply. Get out of my house. Henry, get out. Now. Gabriella hesitated, then nodded. I'll leave the document here, for when you come to your senses. She left, leaving Henry alone in the living room. Popcorn was whining softly, looking for Alice. Regina watched from the kitchen doorway, silent tears streaming down her face. Henry collapsed into the nearest armchair, and for the second time in 7 years, allowed himself to cry. He cried for the wife and son he had lost. He cried for the life he could have had. And he cried for Alice and Vanessa, whom he had just let walk away. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Henry didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't move from the armchair. He just sat there, dead inside once more, while Popcorn lay at his feet, equally devastated. That night Regina came in silently and placed something in his lap. It was a piece of paper. Henry ran his fingers over the texture and recognized it, one of Alice's drawings. This one had 3 figures, a tall man, a little girl, a dog. Underneath, in crooked letters that Vanessa must have helped her write, it said, Friends Forever. Henry clutched the drawing to his chest and cried again. He cried until he had no tears left. He cried until his whole body ached. He cried until dawn. And when the sun rose on Wednesday morning, illuminating New York with golden light, Henry Wallace made a decision. He wasn't going to let fear win again. He wasn't going to let Gabriella control his life. He wasn't going to lose Alice and Vanessa without a fight. He didn't know how yet. He didn't have a clear plan, but he knew one thing. He was going after them. He was going to apologize. He was going to beg for forgiveness. He was going to tell them he was willing to risk everything, even the conservatorship, for a chance to have that family back. Because Alice was right. Everyone leaves sometime. But love stays. And the love he felt for these two who had walked into his life without an invitation was stronger than any fear. He stood up from the armchair, called for Regina, and asked for Vanessa's address. The housekeeper hesitated for only a second before writing it down on a piece of braille paper she kept for emergencies. Go, Mr. Wallace, she said, her voice full of emotion. Go get your family. And Henry went. The address was in the South Bronx. Henry had never been to that part of the city. He'd never had a reason to. His world had always been confined to the Upper East Side, to Fifth Avenue, to the wealthy neighborhoods where people like him moved without ever really seeing the city that surrounded them. But now, sitting in the back of the car Regina had called, Henry felt every mile separating him from Vanessa and Alice, like an eternity. The driver narrated the route, describing the streets, and Henry realized how ignorant he was about the city where he was born. How much longer? He asked, tense. With this traffic, about 2 hours, sir. 2 hours, 120 minutes, 7,200 seconds, each one of them torture. Henry couldn't stop thinking about Alice crying, about Vanessa carrying her away, about the pain in their voices. How could he have been so cowardly? How had he let fear win again? The traffic was impossible. A sunny Friday in New York meant congested streets, endless honking, slow progress. Henry felt the anxiety growing in his chest like a living creature, clawing at his ribs from the inside. "Can't you go any faster?" "I'm afraid not, sir. It's a parking lot out here." Henry clenched his fists. He tried to breathe deeply, to control the urgency screaming in his chest, but it was like trying to hold water in his hands. The anxiety seeped out, grew, overflowed. What if he was too late? What if Vanessa had already decided it was better to forget everything? What if Alice never wanted to see him again? What if? It was raining now. A light drizzle that quickly turned into a downpour. The traffic got even worse. Cars honking, people running with umbrellas, street vendors protecting their goods. "How much longer?" Henry asked again. "About 40 minutes, sir. Maybe more depending on the traffic." 40 minutes. An eternity. Henry found himself praying for the first time in 7 years. He didn't know how anymore, couldn't remember the right words, but he prayed anyway, a raw, desperate plea. Please don't let it be too late. The car finally stopped. "We're here, sir. 342, Sebastian Carnero Street." Henry got out quickly, stumbling on the uneven sidewalk. The driver grabbed his arm. "Do you want me to walk you up?" "No. Wait here, please." Henry made his way toward what he imagined was the entrance to the building. He found the intercom by trial and error, pressed the button for apartment 14. No one answered. He tried again. Nothing. Panic exploded in his chest. No, 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 no. He couldn't be too late. "Excuse me," a woman's voice said behind him. "Are you looking for someone?" "Vanessa, apartment 14, does she live here?" "She does. But she left early this morning with her little girl. I saw them with a suitcase. I think they were going on a trip." The ground moved beneath Henry's feet. A trip. They were leaving New York. And he would never see them again. "Where? Did she say where she was going?" "No, sir. I just saw them get a cab. They were going to some kind of terminal. The bus station, I think." The bus station. Henry ran back to the car, stumbling in the now torrential rain. "Port Authority bus terminal, fast!" The driver took off, but the traffic was still impossible. Henry looked at the watch on his wrist, a useless gesture since he couldn't see it. But the motion was automatic, born of desperation. How long? With luck, half an hour. Without luck, an hour. An hour. The words echoed in Henry's mind. In an hour, Vanessa and Alice could be on a bus to anywhere in the country, and he would never know where. The car inched forward. Henry slammed his fist against his own thigh, a gesture of pure frustration. His cane was at home, forgotten, it didn't matter. If he got to the terminal, he would find a way. "Sorry, sir, but I'm going to have to take a detour. There's an accident on the FDR." More time lost, more precious minutes slipping away like sand in a broken hourglass. Henry thought of Beatrice, not of the accident, not of the loss, but of the woman she was. Strong, decisive, brave. She never would have let fear win. She never would have allowed the opinions of others to determine her choices. "Just be happy," she had said once, when they were still dating and he was hesitating to propose, afraid he wasn't good enough. "There's no perfect moment, Henry. There's only now. And you have to decide if you're going to live now or keep waiting for a tomorrow that might never come." He hadn't lived, not after the accident. He had spent 7 years just existing, breathing, taking up space, but not living. Alice had taught him how to live again. That 2-year-old girl, with her purity and her impossible questions, had shown him that living meant taking risks. It meant letting go of control. It meant accepting that everything could be taken away at any moment and choosing to love anyway. The car finally stopped. "Port Authority, sir." Henry got out without waiting for help, hearing the driver shout behind him that he would wait, not to worry. He ran, guiding himself by the sounds, the voices, the echo of footsteps on concrete. He bumped into people, apologized without stopping, and kept running. The terminal was a chaos of sound. Boarding announcements, crying children, overlapping conversations, the squeal of suitcase wheels. Henry stopped in the middle of the main hall, disoriented, desperate. "Vanessa!" he shouted. "Alice!" His voice was lost in the noise. He tried again, louder. "Vanessa, Alice, please!" People were staring, he could feel it. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except finding them. He ran toward what he imagined was the ticket counter. He slammed his hand on the counter, startling the agent. A woman, in her early 30s, with a 2-year-old girl. Did they buy a ticket? To where? "Sir, I can't give out that kind of information." "Please," Henry's voice broke. "Please, I have to find them. I made a terrible mistake and I need to fix it. Please." Something in his desperation touched the agent. "Let me see. There are a lot of women with small children who bought tickets today. She has long brown hair. The little girl is too, curly hair, dark eyes. Please." "Sir, I really can't—" "Wait. Vanessa. Vanessa Miller." "Yes, that's her name. Where did she go?" "She bought a ticket to Philadelphia. Departs at 4:30, gate 12. Henry looked at his watch again, a useless gesture. "What time is it?" 4:20, sir." 10 minutes. He had 10 minutes. He ran in the direction the agent indicated, following signs he couldn't read, asking strangers for help. His lungs burned. His legs ached. It didn't matter. Gate 12. Where was gate 12? "Over there, sir, to your left." Henry turned, ran, tripped on a step and fell. His hands scraped against the concrete. He got up immediately, ignoring the pain, and kept running, and then he heard it. That voice. The voice that had saved him months ago with a simple question. "Are you all alone?" "Mummy, why are we leaving?" Henry stopped, panting, trying to locate where the voice was coming from. "Because sometimes things don't work out, sweetie, and that's okay. We'll start over." "But I don't want to start over. I want to stay with the quiet man and popcorn." "Alice, please don't make this harder." "Vanessa!" Henry shouted. "Vanessa, wait!" A sudden silence. Then, her voice, incredulous. "Mr. Wallace?" He followed the sound, stumbled again, almost fell. Hands grabbed his arms, small, delicate hands. "Vanessa, what are you doing here?" Henry was too out of breath to answer right away. He braced his hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. When he could finally speak, the words came out in a jumbled rush. "I was a coward. I was an idiot. I let fear win. I let my sister convince me you were trying to con me when all you ever did was show me how to live again. Alice, you asked if I was alone, and I was. I was dying of loneliness. And then you sat in the chair next to me, and everything changed. You both changed everything. And I can't let you leave without saying that, without begging for your forgiveness, without telling you that I choose you. I choose the risk of losing. I choose the pain if it comes. I choose all of it, as long as I have you both in my life." Silence. Henry couldn't see Vanessa's expression, couldn't read her eyes. He could only wait, his heart beating so hard it hurt. "Quiet man?" Alice's voice, small and hesitant. "You came to get us?" Henry knelt, getting down to her level. "I did. I came running. I came begging. I came to say I'm sorry, so sorry for being mean to you." Small arms wrapped around him, squeezing tight. Alice smelled like baby shampoo and cookies. She smelled like home. "You're not going to send us away again?" she asked against his neck. "Never. I swear on everything I have, never again." Henry lifted his face toward Vanessa, still, kneeling on the floor of the bus terminal, hugging Alice. "And you? Can you forgive me? Can you give us a chance? Not as an employer and an employee, but as a real family?" He heard the sound of her swallowing back tears. Then her voice, trembling but firm. "Mr. Wallace, I don't want your pity. I don't want to be a charity case. If we're going to stay, it has to be because you really— I love you." The words exploded out of him, raw and true. "I love you, and I love Alice. I don't know when. It started, I don't know how to explain it right, but it's real. It's the most real thing I've felt in 7 years, and if you give me a chance, I'll spend the rest of my life proving it." More silence. People were passing around them, but Henry was only aware of Vanessa, of her breathing, of her presence. "Final boarding call for Philadelphia, gate 12. "Mommy," Alice called, "are we going?" Vanessa knelt too, bringing herself to Henry's level. He felt delicate fingers touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw, wiping away tears he hadn't even realized he was shedding. "We love you too," she whispered. "Alice talks about you every day, and I try not to think about you and fail miserably every single time." "Then stay, please." "And your sister? Her threats?" "To hell with my sister. To hell with the conservatorship. To hell with all of it. I choose you. I will always choose you." Vanessa laughed, a sound wet with tears. "You're a mess, you know that. Your hair is a wreck, your hands are bleeding, your clothes are soaked. I am, completely. And it's okay, messy is good. Messy is alive." "Then let's go home," Vanessa said, taking his hand. "Let's go home, Henry." His name. She had called him by his name, without the formal Mr. Wallace. It was intimate, familiar, perfect. Henry stood up, holding Alice in one arm and Vanessa's hand with the other. They walked out of the bus terminal together, an unlikely, messy, but real family. In the car on the way back, Alice fell asleep in his lap, exhausted from the emotion. Vanessa held his hand, their fingers intertwined. And Henry, for the first time in a long time, felt complete peace. "What are we going to do about your sister?" Vanessa asked quietly. "I'm going to face her. I'm going to say no. And if she tries for the conservatorship, I'll fight it. I have a right to live my life, to make my own choices. And I choose you. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is." They arrived at the mansion as it was getting dark. Regina was waiting at the door, tears of joy streaming down her face when she saw Henry hadn't returned alone. Popcorn nearly knocked them over with happiness, jumping, barking, licking any patch of skin he could reach. That night, they had dinner together, not in the immense dining room with its 16-seat table, but in the kitchen, at a small, cozy table. Regina made rice, beans, and pan-seared steak with onions. Simple, perfect food. Alice chattered about everything, telling Popcorn about the almost trip, about how the quiet man had run after them. Vanessa smiled, relaxed for the first time in weeks. And Henry just listened, savoring every moment, every word, every laugh. After dinner, he asked to speak with Vanessa privately. They went to the library, a room Henry rarely used since he'd lost his sight. "I need to ask you something," he said, suddenly nervous. "Ask." "You worked here, and I don't want you to feel pressured because of that. I don't want you to think you have to say yes just because I was your boss. But I also can't not ask, because if I don't, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Vanessa laughed softly. "Henry, you're rambling. Just say it." He took a deep breath. "Marry me. I know it's fast. I know it's crazy. I know there are a million reasons to say no. But marry me. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy, making Alice happy. Let me be a part of this family for real." Silence. Long, heavy. Henry felt panic begin to rise. Then Vanessa took his hand and placed it over her heart. He could feel it beating, fast, strong. "Feel that? It's been beating like this since the day you brought home a puppy just to make my daughter smile." "Yes, Henry. My answer is yes." The joy that exploded in his chest was so intense, it almost hurt. Henry pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her, hair breathing in the simple scent of shampoo and soap. "I'm going to make you happy," he promised. "I'll spend every day trying. You already make me happy. Just by existing, you make me happy." They kissed then, a hesitant kiss at first, then deeper, truer. A kiss that promised futures, healed pasts, and celebrated the imperfect, wonderful present. The following Monday, Gabriella showed up again, ready for war. But she found a different Henry, firm, decisive, unshakable. "I'm not signing your document," he said before she could even open her mouth. "And you can start the conservatorship proceedings if you want. I'll fight it. I have lawyers, I have proof that I'm completely capable, and I have, for the first time in 7 years, reasons to fight." Gabriella looked at Vanessa, who stood beside Henry, and at Alice, who was playing with popcorn in the yard. She saw something in her brother's posture, in the way he held this woman's hand, that made her hesitate. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice less harsh. "Absolutely sure. More sure than I've been of anything in my life." Gabriella sighed, sinking into a chair. She looked tired suddenly, less the ruthless executive and more just a woman worried about her brother. "I just wanted to protect you," she said quietly. "When the accident happened, when you lost Beatrice, I was so afraid of losing you too. You became so closed off, so distant. I didn't know how to reach you." "I know, and I appreciate the concern. But I don't need protection. I need the freedom to live, to make mistakes if I have to be happy in my own way." Gabriella looked at Vanessa. "Do you really love him?" "With all my heart," Vanessa answered without hesitation. "And you're not interested in his money?" "If it were about the money, I would have kept quiet and let things be. But I can't stay where I'm not wanted. And your brother made me feel wanted. He made me feel loved." Gabriella was silent for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. It was a small, tired but genuine smile. "All right. I won't interfere anymore. But if you need me, Henry, for anything, I'm here. I'm always here. I know. And thank you." Gabriella got up to leave, but stopped at the door. "Beatrice would have liked her," she said, looking at Vanessa. "My sister-in-law always said you needed someone to make you laugh. Looks like you found her." And she left, leaving Henry and Vanessa alone. The following months were a whirlwind of preparations. The wedding was simple, held in the mansion itself, with only close friends and Regina, who cried from the beginning of the ceremony to the end. Alice was the flower girl, scattering petals down the aisle and stealing the show with her cuteness. When the officiant asked if Henry took Vanessa to be his wife, he answered in a firm voice, "I do," with "All my heart I do." And when it was Vanessa's turn, she held his hands tightly and said, "I do, today, tomorrow, and always." Alice clapped so loudly that everyone laughed, and Henry, feeling the new ring on his finger, his wife's hand in his, Alice's joy echoing around him, felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He felt whole. The years passed like leaves in the wind. The mansion on the Upper East Side ceased to be a silent mausoleum and became a noisy, chaotic home, full of life. Toys were scattered about, Alice's drawings were taped everywhere, and the constant smell of home cooking wafted from the kitchen. Alice grew from 2 to 3 to 4. She started school, made friends, brought even more chaos and joy into the house. Henry picked her up every day, with popcorn always at his side, and she would tell him all about her day on the way home. Vanessa stopped cleaning other houses. Henry insisted she didn't need to work anymore, but she, stubborn and independent, started studying. She went back to school, finished her high school equivalency, and started college, majoring in education. Henry would listen to her study every night, reading aloud, and felt immense pride. And then, one spring morning, Vanessa took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There's going to be more mess in the house," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Henry froze. "Are you—" "I am. We're having a baby." The tears came before he could stop them. Tears of joy, of fear, of hope. Vanessa gently wiped them away. "It's going to be okay," she promised. "I know you're scared. But you're not alone this time. We're in this together." And they were. Throughout the pregnancy, Henry was present. He went to every appointment, listened to every heartbeat, felt every kick. When fear threatened to consume him, when memories of the accident returned, Vanessa was there, holding his hand, reminding him to breathe. The birth was difficult, but without complications. And when they placed the baby in Henry's arms, a healthy, crying boy, he felt the last piece of ice in his heart melt completely. "What should we name him?" Vanessa asked, exhausted but happy. Henry thought of the son he had lost, the son he never got to know. He thought of Beatrice and the life they didn't have, and he realized there was no betrayal in honoring the past while living in the present. "Michael," he said. "I want to name him Michael." It was the name Beatrice had chosen. Vanessa took his hand. "Michael is perfect." Alice, now 7, looked at her baby brother with absolute reverence. "He's so tiny. Can I hold him?" Henry helped settle her on the bed next to Vanessa, placing Michael carefully in the little girl's arms. Gently. "I'll take care of him," Alice promised solemnly. "I'll teach him everything I know, how to draw, how to play. With popcorn, how to make Daddy laugh." And she kept her promise. In the years that followed, Alice was the best big sister Michael could have asked for. She protected him, played with him, taught him, fought with him, but loved him unconditionally. 5 years after that rainy night at the bus terminal, the house on the Upper East Side was unrecognizable. The formal dining room now had one end of the table covered in colored pencils and paper. The living room had a corner with a soft rug and a toy basket. The yard had a swing set that Henry had installed. Every night at 7 o'clock sharp, the family had dinner together, not at the 16-seat table which they had donated, but at a round table that perfectly accommodated the 4 of them. Alice, now 8, would read passages from books to her father while they ate. Michael, at 3, would imitate everything his sister did, babbling words and laughing. Vanessa would knit beside Henry while they watched the children play. The new hobby calmed her, she said, and Henry loved the rhythmic sound of the needles. One night, after the children were asleep, Henry and Vanessa stood on the terrace listening to the city. He was holding Michael, who was already asleep, smelling of baby shampoo and milk. "Thank you," Henry said suddenly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For coming back. For building this life with me." Vanessa rested her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for running after us, for choosing to take a risk. Do you think Beatrice would be happy with all of this?" "I think so. I think she'd be happy to know you found happiness again, that you didn't stay trapped in the past. I still think about her, and the baby we lost. I know, and that's okay. Love isn't a finite quantity. You can love the ones you lost and love the ones you have now. One doesn't diminish the other." Henry kissed the top of her head. "How did you get so wise?" "I learned from a 2-year-old who once asked a lonely man if he wanted some company. They laughed together quietly so as not to wake Michael. And they stood there, holding each other, listening to the city, listening to life happening around them and inside them." Henry thought about how many times he had wished the accident had taken him instead of Beatrice. He thought about how many years he had wasted just surviving, afraid to live. He thought about how he had almost lost everything to cowardice. But he hadn't. And now, holding his son in his arms, with his wife by his side, knowing that Alice was sleeping safely in her room with popcorn at the foot of her bed, Henry finally understood something fundamental. There were no replacements. Beatrice would never be replaced. The son he lost would never be forgotten. But that didn't mean there couldn't be new beginnings. New loves, new life. The pain of the loss never went away completely. There were still nights he woke up sweating, dreaming of the accident. There were still moments he felt Beatrice's absence like a hole in his chest, but those pains no longer defined his existence. They were a part of him, but they weren't all of him. He was a husband, he was a father, he was a friend. He was someone who had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but choosing love in spite of fear. "Let's go inside," Vanessa said softly. "It's getting chilly." They went in together, Henry carrying Michael, Vanessa checking to make sure Alice was tucked in. Then they lay down in bed, Michael between them, and Henry felt that peace that only comes from knowing you are exactly where you're supposed to be. Before falling asleep, he whispered, "I love you." "I love you too," Vanessa replied, and Michael, half asleep, murmured, "Love you." Henry smiled. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in nearly a decade, he slept without nightmares, without fear, without pain. He slept in peace, he slept at home, he slept loved. And in the Darkness of the room, if he imagined very hard, he could almost hear Beatrice's voice whispering, "You did it. You learned how to live again. I'm proud of you." And he was. He was proud of himself, proud that he'd had the courage, proud that he had chosen love. Life, with all its messiness and unpredictability, with all its joys and sorrows, was worth living. And Henry Wallace was finally, truly living. End of story. We hope the story of Henry, Vanessa, and Alice touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of overcoming love and new beginnings, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment stood out to you the most. Was it the first meeting between Henry and Alice? The reunion at the bus terminal? The birth of little Michael? Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, showing that it's never too late to start over, and that love can heal even the deepest wounds. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions.